I just want to say that I really enjoyed the book, and I have a few questions here. Specifically, first of all, concerning there's this section in the book that is a reference to J.G. Ballard's poem "What I Believe," which for me was a really kind of formative piece, and I think that Ballard is such a broadly inspirational writer. And also the book was referred to as hauntological a lot. Late scholar of hauntology Mark Fisher has said of J.G. Ballard that, quote, like his admirer Jean Baudrillard, Ballard has for a long time resembled a rogue AI. Repermuating and the same few themes, occasionally adding a sprinkling of contemporary detail to freshen up a limited repertoire of fixations. Fixations, appropriate since after all, Ballard's obsession is obsession. That's what Mark Fisher said about Ballard. And I wanted to ask you about that, about obsession with obsession, obsession being obsession, and how you saw that in Ballard's work, and what kind of drew you to that section that draws on that poem.
Baudrillard and Mark Fisher said a lot of things, I must admit. And I knew Mark Fisher personally. I don't know if you guys know who Mark Fisher is, but he was quite an important cultural thinker. Contemporary, he died a few years ago, but I actually edited his stuff for a volume that I did for Zero Books called Punk is Dead, Modernity Killed Every Night, and he was a really, really nice guy. And unfortunately we won't kind of go into that really. But what I think about that question about obsession is that I think, if anything, the book Rip Back Sides is about having an obsession, about not having an obsession, and that's because the book is adrift. Really, it's a free and easy drift in all senses. When I say free and easy, I mean not that kind of easy. I don't know if people are familiar with the concept of the drift, but it came from the 1960s, and it was formulated by a radical arts and politics group called the Situationists. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Situationists. Maybe I'll kind of say a couple of words about them in a minute. But the whole idea of the drift that came from those guys, and especially a guy called Guy Debord, is a kind of unplanned journey through a city or a series of cities with the calculated and focused aim of making that journey kind of removed from certain normal social relations, and those kind of social relations would be based on both leisure and also work. And what it is, it's an attempt, a conscious attempt to fathom the depths of the city, and by that I mean look for, I suppose you could call it kind of like, without going woo, kind of like a spiritual idea of the city beneath the temporal one. So what I was kind of searching for in this non-obsessive drift was to find a deep terrain within which I could fathom both emotional and physical disturbances, I suppose, and that's exactly what Rip Back Sides is. And And as I said, I don't know how familiar people are with the Situationists, but they were very influential in the punk and post-punk years for some of us. And they were a group of radical, sort of largely French thinkers who dealt with the politics of desire, I suppose you could call it. So that they kind of dealt with. It was kind of based on another group of cultural thinkers called the Frankfurt School, really. But I mean, it was the whole idea of dealing with issues such as actual boredom of everyday life and what the Situationists were very interested in was a revolution of everyday life, which is why they kind of appealed to people like me. Because their work kind of, even though it was theory and quite heavy, it read like poetry, it read like Shakespeare, and it was utterly fabulous and very captivating. So the idea of obsession is actually not to be obsessed, but to drift. One more thing about the situation is, I think this is fantastic. People might have seen this. It's kind of like a cartoon. It originally came out in a Situationist pamphlet, but Factory Records reproduced this cartoon, and it's great. It's two cowboys, and one says to the other, "What's going on, man?" And the other cowboy says, "Well, reification," which is kind of like a heavy Marxist word. And the other cowboy says, "Wow, I bet that entails reading really long, heavy books." And the other cowboy says, "No, man, you just got to drift, just drift." So that's the vibe, not the whole kind of obsession thing. But I mean, the other link to kind of like the non-obsessional nature is the actual style of the book, which you may have gathered. It's kind of loose and fragmentary, and I wrote it in such a way because it's actually kind of supposed to be lines in postcards that were never sent originally from those cities. So it's as you would write a postcard line that I never kind of sent. So that was the whole kind of conceptual idea of it. But I was very influenced by electronic music at the time, especially kind of people like Brian Eno and Terry Riley, and I liked it because I mean the whole idea of that kind of minimal ambient music is to create whole worlds, but using very few chords. And I thought, well, I think I could do the kind of same with the words. And I'd never kind of read anything like that before or written it, and I kind of that was the kind of attempt. So I wanted to create a whole world by just layering, very, very few lines, which was it. But you know, there's a whole misconception, I think, about that whole idea of minimalism in writing. I mean, people in England, I presume in America, I mean, kind of a bit put out by the fact that the kids these days, they haven't got the concentration to read proper novels. It's all to blame. The phones are to blame for this technology, and I wanted the book really to help put that record kind of straight, because I mean, what I kind of think is that it's neither just a current concern, and I don't think it's a negative thing at all either. And the kind of reason for that really is that, well, every technological kind of leap has altered the way that we engage with the world. I mean, it's kind of inevitable. It's something that, isn't to be complained about, it's to be celebrated in a way, which I hope I'm doing with Rip-Back Slides. And also the idea of concentration, I think is kind of like a bit overrated. Concentration itself actually came to the fore, the concept, the very concept of concentration came to the fore only as late as the Industrial Revolution, and it came to the fore simply because concentration became linked to the work ethic ideologically, and concentration was seen as part of the kind of Protestant work ethic. And if you were distracted, if you were away with the fairies, if you were kind of floaty, well, that was no good for the boss. You're not good for kind of like working, and that's what was kind of necessary. Whereas in the past, say in the 16th century, perhaps you know this, perhaps you don't. I mean, the people that did read, they didn't read books from cover to cover. They didn't read them in a totality. What they did is they read through texts and took what they wanted, the lines that were good, the phrases that were good, and the quotes that were good, and because largely the people who read were writers as well, they stole them, they nicked them, they basically looked for stuff to nick. Which kind of, does that remind you of any kind of era? I mean, it's like some people do. And so that whole kind of idea of distraction, don't fall for that. It's good to be distracted. Anyway, that's my party political broadcast. So that's what Rips and Torn is all about. It's the ideas behind it, at least.
No, yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the situationists and also kind of the relationship between this text and the kind of situationist mode of travel or cities or kind of a dispersal, which I think is also like very relevant to this idea of distraction and like boredom, which leads to distraction, and these kind of and these like other modes of thinking. The book is in kind of, I would call them maybe fragments, right? And these fragments are from not only different cities, but also different times. The earliest of the fragments are from the early 80s, or I think maybe even somewhere from the late 70s. Yeah. And the most recent are as recent as last year. I wanted to ask you about how your perception of, obviously this is a post-punk book, a post-punk situation, if you will. And I wanted to ask about how you see that moniker or that kind of banner changing throughout time, and if you even really think it's relevant anymore. In this period of time, I think that one kind of aspect of having this technology at our fingertips is this idea, especially amongst the younger generation, of a loss of subculture, or the possibility of subculture, or like a post-punk. So I wanted to ask about how this book kind of deals with that throughout time.
Well, I call the book myself kind of like a post-punk book. But by that, all I meant was, maybe it's kind of like personal to me, but punk was like a very basic format, very raw, kind of totally based on pure expression. And post-punk was seen and deemed as something that was more experimental and free-flowing and move the parameters of the culture. So, I mean, to me, I call it a post-punk book because that's just how I kind of understand the kind of freedoms that it afforded. I think it's meaningless in any other sense as far as the book is concerned. But as far as your question about subcultures, well, I don't believe that the conditions that created, for instance, teenagers, which went on to create subcultures, if you like. I mean, those conditions were basically, 1950s American affluence, with young people having the capacity to spend a lot of money quite early in their lives, which created a market. People wanted to sell these kids shit, whatever, records, clothes, books, and that's how teenagers happened. And it's cynical, but it was fun for the people involved, obviously. And then those subcultures would kind of like would kind of flow naturally, so you came to kind of punk rock. But I mean, all those late capitalist, stand first. They don't things kind of like moved on from that kind of stuff. So I don't think subcultures will ever exist in that format again. And I mean, do kids care? I mean, the kids live in the moment. They don't care. It's only kind of old people who kind of moan about it. Where's the new punk? Well, there is no new punk. There's going to be no new punk or new hippie or anything. It's just totally different, totally changed. But I'll tell you one thing though. I mean, about punk as a subculture. Can I carry? Okay. So I mean, I got into punk rock simply because when I grew up in the 1970s, they were my kind of formative years. I mean, in the UK, I lived in a suburban town about 30 miles outside London, kind of like an industrial factory town, really. And if you got a couple of exams, you could perhaps get a job in local government if you were really lucky. But otherwise, you went into the factory, onto the production line, and the ideas such as individuality and irony, concepts of that, they didn't exist at all. The 1970s in the UK and perhaps in America as well were based utterly and completely on conformity. And if you didn't conform to the prescriptions that are set by your peers, you were in trouble. You were in serious trouble. There was a lot of violence going around, and it was kind of heavy. And the punk rock freed you from all that, because suddenly overnight, all those former kingpins of your peer group who basically spent their lives kind of fighting and a lot of drinking and a lot of football violence. They meant nothing anymore, because there was a new world created, and the importance of punk was in its liberation from conformity, from ideas. Those ideals, and it freed people, including me, in one simple way, and that was it created a signpost to the future, and that signpost to the future kind of consisted of a lot of disparate and beautiful things, like, you know, clothes, bondage trousers, with all the ideas inherent in that, and sex and drugs and philosophy, and, you know, those are kind of these things you could take that as far as you wanted, that signpost. You could go on that journey as far as you yourself wanted to. And it wasn't a simple subculture. I mean, it's like we're still trying to unravel it now, you know, the whole idea of it. And it's not just about guys running around with pointy shoes like the rockers. It's way beyond that. So when I say that there are no subcultures, I'd like to say that punk wasn't a simple subculture. It was something more, and something more exciting on kind of every level. So.